Have you ever thought about going through a situation where one word could completely change the dynamic between you and your crush? Casey Martinez had always been terrible at hiding her feelings, a fact that her friends constantly reminded her of with varying degrees of amusement and concern. When she was nervous, she talked too much, filling awkward silences with random observations about the weather or overly detailed explanations about her latest Netflix obsession. When she was excited, she gestured wildly with her hands, often knocking over drinks or accidentally hitting people in the process. And when she was attracted to someone, particularly when that someone was Jenna Walsh, the confident, gorgeous brunette who had somehow become the center of Casey's universe over the past 6 months, she became a walking disaster of epic proportions. It was a Tuesday afternoon at their usual spot, a cozy cafe near campus where their group of 5 friends gathered every week to catch up, complain about professors, and pretend they weren't all slowly dying under the weight of their respective academic responsibilities. Casey had arrived early, as she always did when she knew Jenna would be there, positioning herself strategically across from where Jenna typically sat, so she could spend the meal stealing glances without being too obvious about it. The conversation was flowing normally. Emma was ranting about her organic chemistry lab partner, Sophie was describing her latest Tinder disaster, and Alex was showing everyone photos from her weekend hiking trip when the catastrophe happened. Casey had been trying to get the hot sauce that was sitting directly in front of Jenna, reaching across the table with a kind of awkward stretch that should have been a warning sign that disaster was imminent. But instead of saying, "Jenna, could you pass the hot sauce?" like a normal human being, or even just "excuse me," while pointing at what she needed, Casey's brain apparently decided to short-circuit at the worst possible moment. "Babe, can you pass the words hung in the air like a neon sign advertising Casey's deepest, most embarrassing secret. The entire table fell silent with a kind of complete, deafening quiet that only occurred during the most mortifying moments of human existence. 5 pairs of eyes turned to stare at Casey, who felt her face flush so red she probably looked like she was having an allergic reaction to something. Emma's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Sophie's eyes widened to comical proportions, and Alex made a small choking sound that might have been surprise or suppressed laughter. But it was Jenna's reaction that made Casey want to crawl under the table and disappear forever, or possibly transfer to a university in another country where no one would ever know about this moment. Instead of looking shocked or uncomfortable or confused like any reasonable person would when their friend accidentally called them babe in front of everyone, Jenna's face lit up with a kind of mischievous smile that Casey had learned to both love and fear over their months of friendship. It was the same expression Jenna wore when she was about to make a joke at someone's expense, or when she had figured out something amusing that no one else had noticed yet. "Sure thing," Jenna said, her voice carrying just enough emphasis to make it clear that she had definitely noticed Casey's slip-up and was definitely not going to let it slide. She passed the hot sauce with deliberate slowness, her fingers brushing against Casey's for just a moment longer than necessary, all while maintaining that knowing smile that made Casey's heart do uncomfortable acrobatics in her chest. "There you go, babe." The way Jenna said the word back to her was devastating in its casual confidence, like she was testing how it felt on her tongue, like she was already planning all the ways she could use this moment against Casey in the future. Casey mumbled something that might have been thanks and focused intensely on her sandwich, hoping that if she avoided eye contact long enough, everyone would forget what had just happened and move on to discussing something safe, like their upcoming midterms or the weather. But she could feel Jenna's eyes on her, could sense that satisfied amusement radiating across the table like heat from a campfire. The conversation eventually resumed, with Emma launching into a detailed description of her weekend plans and Sophie asking Alex about her hiking boots, but Casey barely heard any of it. She was too busy replaying the moment over and over in her mind, analyzing every syllable of Jenna's response, trying to decode whether that teasing tone meant anything significant or if Jenna was just enjoying having something to embarrass Casey with. Because that was the thing about Jenna Walsh that had been driving Casey slowly insane for months. She was impossible to read when she wanted to be. One moment she would be laughing at Casey's terrible jokes with genuine warmth, touching her arm during conversations, sending late-night texts about random things she thought Casey would find interesting. The next moment, she would be flirting outrageously with someone at a party or casually mentioning dates with guys from her economics class, leaving Casey to wonder if all those moments of connection had been friendship or something more. Now, thanks to Casey's malfunctioning brain and complete inability to control her mouth under pressure, Jenna had ammunition that could make Casey's life either wonderfully complicated or absolutely miserable, depending on what she decided to do with it. As they were packing up to leave, Jenna appeared at Casey's elbow with that same mischievous smile, close enough that Casey could smell her perfume and feel the warmth radiating from her skin. "See you tomorrow in Professor Miller's class," she said sweetly, slinging her bag over her shoulder. "I'll save you a seat, babe." And with that, she was gone, leaving Casey standing frozen in the middle of the cafe, clutching her backpack and trying to process what had just happened. Sophie appeared beside her a moment later, nudging Casey's shoulder with barely contained glee. "Oh my God, you are so screwed," she said, not unkindly but with the sort of delight that comes from witnessing someone else's romantic drama unfold in real time. "Jenna is never going to let you live this down. You know that, right?" Casey groaned, finally allowing herself to slump against the nearest wall in defeat. "I know. I'm dead. I'm completely, utterly dead. She's going to torture me with this forever." But even as she said it, even as she contemplated the various ways Jenna could make her life complicated with this new piece of information, Casey couldn't quite shake the memory of how Jenna's eyes had sparkled when she said, "babe," back to her, or the way her fingers had lingered just a beat too long when passing the hot sauce. Maybe she was reading too much into it. Maybe it was just wishful thinking combined with terminal embarrassment, but there had been something in Jenna's expression that suggested she might be enjoying this dynamic more than a simple friend would. The question was whether Casey was brave enough to find out what that something might mean, or if she would spend the next few weeks hiding in the library until this whole thing blew over. The next morning, Casey woke up with the kind of dread that usually accompanied major exams or dentist appointments, except this was worse because she couldn't postpone or reschedule facing Jenna in Professor Miller's American Literature class. She'd spent most of the previous evening alternating between replaying the Babe incident in excruciating detail and crafting elaborate plans to avoid Jenna for the rest of the semester, possibly the rest of her college career. None of these plans were particularly feasible, especially considering they shared 3 classes together and had the same friend group, but desperate times called for desperate measures. Casey arrived at the lecture hall 15 minutes early, hoping to blend into the middle rows where she could observe Jenna's arrival without being immediately noticeable. She pulled out her notebook, organized her pens with unnecessary precision, and tried to project the aura of someone who was definitely not thinking about yesterday's mortifying slip-up and absolutely not wondering what kind of torture her crush had planned for today. Her strategy lasted exactly 12 minutes, which was when Jenna walked through the door wearing a sundress that should have been illegal on college campuses and carrying a coffee that smelled like vanilla and possibilities. Casey watched in growing horror as Jenna's eyes scanned the lecture hall, obviously looking for her, before landing on Casey's carefully chosen middle row seat with obvious delight. "There you are," Jenna said brightly, climbing over 2 other students with apologetic smiles before settling into the empty seat directly next to Casey. "I saved you a seat like I promised, but you got here first. How responsible of you, babe." The word hit Casey like a physical blow, delivered with the same casual confidence as yesterday, but somehow even more devastating in the quiet of the lecture hall. Several students turned to look at them, and Casey felt her face flush with the kind of heat that probably registered on satellite imagery. "Jenna," Casey whispered urgently, "you can't keep saying that. People are going to think." "Think what?" Jenna interrupted, her voice carrying just enough innocence to be infuriating. "That we're close friends who are comfortable with casual endearments? There's nothing weird about that, babe." Casey stared at her notebook, trying to focus on the date she was writing at the top of the page rather than the way Jenna's perfume was making it difficult to think clearly. "It's weird when you keep emphasizing it like that. It sounds like you're doing it on purpose." "Maybe I am," Jenna said, and when Casey finally looked up, she found Jenna watching her with an expression that was equal parts amusement and something else, something that made Casey's pulse quicken in ways that had nothing to do with embarrassment. "Maybe I think it's cute how flustered you get." Maybe I like seeing you blush. Before Casey could process what that might mean, Professor Miller entered the classroom and began discussing their upcoming assignment on romantic poetry in the 19th century, which felt like the universe's idea of a cruel joke. Hey, if you're enjoying this story, go ahead and drop a like to help us grow even more. And let me know in the comments, on a scale from 0 to 10, what score would you give this story so far? Your feedback makes all the difference. Casey tried desperately to focus on taking notes, but she was hyper-aware of Jenna beside her, the way she twirled her pen while thinking, the way she occasionally glanced over at Casey's notebook as if checking her interpretation of the professor's points. Halfway through the lecture, Casey felt her phone buzz with a text message. She glanced down discreetly and nearly choked when she saw Jenna's name on the screen, even though Jenna was literally sitting right next to her. The message read, "You're cute when you're trying to ignore me, babe. But your handwriting gets messy when you're distracted." Casey's pen slipped across the page, leaving an embarrassing ink mark that perfectly illustrated Jenna's point. She looked sideways to find Jenna smiling at her phone, typing another message with a kind of satisfied expression that suggested she was enjoying this way too much. The next text arrived immediately. "Want to grab lunch after class? I promise to behave, mostly." The mostly felt loaded with implications that made Casey's heart do complicated gymnastics routines in her chest. She typed back, "Fine. But can you please stop calling me that in public? It's embarrassing." Jenna's response came so quickly she must have had it ready. "Stop calling you what, babe? I have no idea what you're talking about." Casey nearly groaned out loud, which would have been mortifying in the middle of Professor Miller's discussion of Elizabeth Barrett Browning's sonnet structure. She could feel Jenna's shoulders shaking with suppressed laughter beside her, could sense that this was exactly the reaction Jenna had been hoping for. When class ended, Casey packed her bag with deliberate slowness, hoping some of the other students would clear out before she had to navigate walking across campus with Jenna in full teasing mode. But Jenna waited patiently, chatting with classmates about the upcoming assignment while occasionally glancing at Casey with that mischievous smile that was becoming both familiar and terrifying. "Ready for lunch?" Jenna asked once they were alone, slinging her bag over her shoulder with casual grace. "I was thinking about that new sandwich place on 5th Street. Their turkey club looked amazing yesterday." "Sure," Casey managed, trying to project normalcy while internally preparing for whatever fresh torture Jenna had planned. They walked across campus in relative peace, discussing Professor Miller's assignment and complaining about the unseasonably warm weather, and Casey almost started to relax. Maybe Jenna was done with the teasing. Maybe yesterday's incident would fade into their shared history as just another funny story to laugh about later. That optimism lasted until they reached the sandwich shop and Jenna stepped up to the counter to order. "I'll have the turkey club with extra avocado," she told the cashier with a bright smile, "and my friend here will have." She turned to Casey, with expectant eyebrows raised. "What do you want, babe?" The cashier, a college-aged guy with multiple piercings and a bored expression, suddenly looked much more interested in their interaction. Casey could feel heat rising in her cheeks again as she stammered out her order for grilled cheese and tomato soup, hyper-aware that this stranger now probably thought they were dating or at least involved in some kind of romantic situation. When they found a table by the window, Jenna was practically glowing with satisfaction. "You know," she said, unwrapping her sandwich with deliberate casualness, "I've been thinking about yesterday. About how cute you looked when you got all flustered after your little slip-up." "It wasn't a slip-up," Casey protested weakly. "It was a mistake. A brain malfunction. Temporary insanity brought on by low blood sugar or something." Jenna mused, taking a bite of her sandwich while maintaining eye contact in a way that should have been illegal. "If you say so. But you know what I think." "I'm afraid to ask." "I think maybe it wasn't as much of a mistake as you want everyone to believe," Jenna said, her voice dropping just low enough that Casey had to lean forward to hear her properly. "I think maybe you've been wanting to call me that for a while, and yesterday you just forgot to filter yourself." The accuracy of Jenna's observation hit Casey like a truck. Because the truth was, she had been thinking of Jenna as babe in her head for months, along with various other endearments that she would rather die than admit to out loud. Late-night conversations with herself in the mirror often involved phrases like, "God, I wish I could tell her how I feel," and "maybe if I'm really lucky, someday I'll get to call her beautiful to her face instead of just thinking it." But admitting that would require a level of vulnerability that Casey wasn't sure she was ready for, especially when she still had no idea whether Jenna's teasing was friendly or something more significant. "You're imagining things," Casey said finally, though her voice lacked conviction even to her own ears. "We're friends. Friends don't. I mean, it was just a weird brain moment." "If you say so," Jenna repeated, but her smile suggested she wasn't buying Casey's explanation for a second. "But just so you know, I don't mind it. The pet name thing. It's actually kind of sweet." She paused, watching Casey's reaction carefully. "And if you ever want to slip up again, well, I wouldn't be opposed to that either, babe." The teasing had evolved into a full-scale campaign of psychological warfare, and Casey was losing badly. It had been 3 days since the lunch incident, and Jenna seemed to have made it her personal mission to work "babe" into every conversation they had, each time with increasing creativity and devastating effectiveness. During their study group session yesterday, Jenna had asked, "Babe, can you explain this calculus problem to me?" while batting her eyelashes in a way that made Casey forget how basic algebra worked. In the campus bookstore, she'd called out, "Babe, over here," loud enough for half the student body to turn and stare. And this morning, she texted Casey a coffee order with "thanks in advance, babe" that had nearly made Casey walk into a lamppost. But it was Friday evening at Emma's apartment party that Jenna decided to take things to a whole new level of torment. Casey had been standing in the kitchen, nursing a beer and trying to avoid the dancing crowd in the living room, when Jenna appeared beside her wearing a black top that should have come with a warning label and a smile that spelled trouble in 17 different languages. "Having fun, babe?" Jenna asked, moving closer than strictly necessary in the crowded kitchen space. The music was loud enough that she had to lean in to be heard, her breath warm against Casey's ear in a way that made coherent thought temporarily impossible. "It's fine," Casey managed, hyper-aware of how close Jenna was standing, how the scent of her perfume was making it difficult to focus on anything other than the way her lips moved when she talked. "Just not really a party person, I guess." "I know," Jenna said softly, and something in her tone made Casey look at her more carefully. "You prefer quiet conversations and coffee shops and bookstores where you can actually hear yourself think." The observation was accurate and unexpectedly tender, lacking the teasing edge that had characterized most of their interactions this week. For a moment, Casey caught a glimpse of something deeper in Jenna's expression, something that looked almost vulnerable. "How do you know that?" Casey asked, genuinely curious about when Jenna had started paying such close attention to her preferences and personality quirks. "Because I pay attention," Jenna replied, her voice still soft despite the music thumping around them. "I notice things about you, Casey. Like how you always order the same coffee but pretend to consider other options first. How you get this little wrinkle between your eyebrows when you're really concentrating on something. How you bite your lip when you're nervous." She paused, moving even closer. "How you get this adorable blush every time I call you babe." Before Casey could respond, Sophie appeared beside them with the enthusiasm of someone who had definitely been drinking for longer than was advisable. "Casey, there you are. Come dance with us." She grabbed Casey's arm with surprising strength for someone her size. Emma's trying to recreate some TikTok dance, and it's hilarious. "I'm not really a dancer," Casey protested, but Sophie was already pulling her toward the living room where Emma was indeed attempting some sort of complicated choreography with mixed results. "Come on, babe," Jenna said, following behind them with that mischievous smile back in full force. "Live a little. I promise not to judge your dancing much." The next hour passed in a blur of terrible music, questionable dance moves, and way too much awareness of Jenna's presence in Casey's peripheral vision. Every time Casey started to relax and actually enjoy herself, she would catch Jenna watching her with an expression that was becoming increasingly difficult to interpret. There was amusement there, yes, but also something warmer, something that made Casey's heart do complicated acrobatics every time their eyes met across the crowded room. It was nearly midnight when Casey finally escaped to the apartment's small balcony for some fresh air and a break from the sensory overload inside. She was leaning against the railing, looking out at the city lights and trying to process the evening's events, when the sliding door opened behind her. "Hiding out here, babe?" Jenna's voice was soft, lacking the performative quality it had carried inside around their friends. She joined Casey at the railing, close enough that their shoulders brushed when she moved. "Just needed some quiet," Casey admitted, glancing sideways at Jenna's profile in the moonlight. "It's been a long week." "Has it?" Jenna asked, and there was something in her tone that suggested she knew exactly why Casey's week had been particularly challenging. "Any particular reason for that?" Casey felt her pulse quicken as she realized this might be the opening she'd been both hoping for and dreading all week. "You know exactly why," she said quietly, surprised by her own boldness. "You've been driving me crazy with the whole babe thing, and you know it." "Have I?" Jenna turned to face her fully, that familiar mischievous smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "And how exactly have I been driving you crazy?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications that Casey wasn't sure she was ready to unpack. "Jenna," she said carefully, "what are we doing here?" "This whole week, the teasing, the way you've been. I don't know what this is, and it's making me insane." Jenna was quiet for a long moment, studying Casey's face in the dim light from the apartment behind them. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than Casey had ever heard it. "What do you want it to be?" The question hit Casey like a physical blow because it forced her to confront the thing she'd been avoiding thinking about all week. What did she want this to be? She wanted Jenna to keep calling her babe, but not as a joke. She wanted the teasing to be flirting, wanted the casual touches to mean something, wanted permission to call Jenna beautiful and sweet and all the other things she'd been thinking but never daring to say. "I want," Casey started, then stopped, terrified of saying too much and ruining everything. "I want to know if you're just having fun embarrassing me, or if there's something else going on here." "Something else like what?" Jenna asked, stepping closer until Casey could see the flecks of gold in her dark eyes. "Casey, I need you to be specific about what you're asking me." The demand for clarity was both terrifying and liberating because it meant Casey couldn't hide behind vague implications and wishful thinking anymore. "I want to know if you have feelings for me," she said in a rush, the words tumbling out before she could lose her nerve. "Real feelings, not just friendly affection or amusement at my expense. I want to know if, when you call me babe, part of you means it the way I wish you meant it." Jenna's smile was radiant, transforming her entire face in a way that made Casey's chest tight with hope and terror. "Casey Martinez," she said softly, reaching up to touch Casey's cheek with gentle fingers. "You beautiful, oblivious disaster. I've been flirting with you all week. I've been flirting with you for months, actually. But you're so convinced that someone like me couldn't possibly be interested in someone like you that you've been missing every signal I've been sending." Before Casey could process what that meant, before she could ask for clarification or express her disbelief, Jenna was kissing her, soft and sweet and perfect under the stars above Emma's apartment balcony. When they broke apart, Casey felt like her entire world had shifted on its axis. "So," Jenna whispered against her lips, "still think the babe thing was just a joke?" The first thing Casey noticed when she woke up was that her lips still tingled from last night's kiss. The second thing she noticed was the 17 text messages from their friends, ranging from Emma's all caps, "OMG, did you and Jenna finally happen?" to Sophie's more subtle "saw you two disappear to the balcony last night" eyes, to Alex's characteristically direct, "about damn time you idiots figured it out." But it was the message from Jenna, sent at 2:47 a.m., that made Casey's heart do those familiar acrobatics. "Good morning, babe. Ready for everyone to know that's not a joke anymore." Casey stared at her phone screen, replaying the previous night's events with the kind of detailed analysis usually reserved for important exams. The kiss had been perfect, soft and sweet, and everything she'd been dreaming about for months. But in the harsh light of morning, doubt was creeping in with the persistence of a particularly annoying alarm clock. What if Jenna had been drinking more than Casey realized? What if she regretted it now that the romantic atmosphere of moonlight and city lights had been replaced by the mundane reality of Saturday morning? Casey was still spiraling through various catastrophic scenarios when her phone rang with Jenna's name on the screen. "Hello." Casey answered, trying to sound casual rather than like someone who had been overthinking every moment of their kiss for the past hour. "Good morning, beautiful." Jenna's voice was warm and slightly husky with sleep, lacking any trace of regret or awkwardness. "How did you sleep?" The casual endearment hit Casey like a warm wave, different from the strategic babes of the past week, but infinitely more devastating in its sincerity. "I slept fine," Casey managed, though that was a complete lie considering she'd spent most of the night replaying their conversation and wondering what happened next. "Jenna, about last night. Are you about to panic and try to convince me it was a mistake?" Jenna interrupted with fond amusement. "Because I can practically hear your brain overanalyzing through the phone, and I want to stop that train of thought before it completely derails." "I'm not panicking," Casey protested, then paused. "Okay, maybe I'm panicking a little. But can you blame me? You've been my friend for months, and suddenly last night we're kissing on Emma's balcony, and I don't know what that means or what happens now or if you're going to pretend it never happened when we see our friends later." "Casey." Jenna's voice was gentle but firm. "Breathe. What happens now is that I take you on a proper date, assuming you want that. What happens now is that when I call you babe, it's because you're actually my babe, not because I'm teasing you. What happens now is that you stop assuming I'm going to change my mind about liking you just because the sun came up." The relief that flooded through Casey was so intense it was almost dizzying. "You really want to date me? Even though I'm a disaster who calls you pet names in front of people and then has panic attacks about it afterward." "Especially because of that," Jenna laughed. "Casey, your disasters are adorable. Your panic attacks are cute. The way you blush when you're embarrassed makes me want to find new ways to make you blush, but in good ways. Ways that make you happy instead of mortified." She paused. "Besides, someone has to keep you from walking into lampposts while reading my texts." "That happened one time," Casey protested, though she was smiling now, the familiar comfort of their banter easing the anxiety that had been building all morning. "And it was a very confusing text. You sent me a picture of your coffee with a heart emoji and I didn't know how to interpret it." "Well, now you know," Jenna said warmly. "From now on, when I send you pictures of coffee with heart emojis, it means I'm thinking about you and wishing you were here to drink coffee with me. When I call you babe, it means you're my girlfriend and I'm ridiculously happy about that fact. When I tease you, it's because I think you're beautiful when you're flustered, not because I'm trying to embarrass you." The word girlfriend sent electricity through Casey's entire nervous system. "Girlfriend," she repeated, testing how it felt on her tongue. "I'm your girlfriend." "If you want to be," Jenna said, and Casey could hear the smile in her voice. "I mean, we should probably have an actual conversation about it, but yes, that's what I'm hoping for. You, me, official relationship status, proper dates instead of just hanging out in groups and pretending I'm not completely gone on you." Casey felt tears prick her eyes, but they were the good kind, the kind that came with overwhelming relief and happiness rather than panic and embarrassment. "I want that," she said quietly. "I've wanted that for months, actually. I've been calling you babe in my head since probably our third conversation, but I was too scared to think it meant anything." "It means everything," Jenna said softly. "Casey, you have no idea how long I've been waiting for you to realize that I've been flirting with you. The coffee orders, the study sessions where I sit way too close to you, the way I always text you first when something funny happens, none of that was platonic." "Really?" Casey asked, though part of her had always wondered if she was reading too much into Jenna's attention. "Even when you helped me study for Professor Chen's midterm and you kept making excuses to touch my hand when you were explaining concepts." "Especially then," Jenna laughed. "Casey, I don't need to hold someone's hand to explain calculus. I was just looking for excuses to touch you because I'd been thinking about holding your hand for weeks and couldn't figure out how to make it happen naturally." The revelation was both wonderful and slightly mortifying because it meant Casey had been oblivious to months of flirting while convinced that her feelings were completely one-sided. "God, I'm such an idiot," she groaned. "How did I miss all of that?" Because you're adorable and insecure, and you have this idea that people like me don't fall for people like you, Jenna said gently. But Casey, people like me fall for people like you all the time. Especially when people like you are smart and funny and kind and beautiful, and especially when they make terrible jokes that somehow become endearing after the 15th time you hear them. My jokes aren't terrible, Casey protested weakly. They're strategically nerdy. They're terrible, Jenna said affectionately. And I love them. I love that you quote obscure literature during casual conversations. I love that you get excited about perfectly organized color-coded notes. I love that you called me babe in front of everyone because you were so focused on hot sauce that your brain forgot to filter your thoughts. She paused. I love that your first instinct was panic instead of just asking me how I felt about it. Well, Casey said, feeling her cheeks warm with a blush that was happiness rather than embarrassment for once. When you put it like that, I guess we make a pretty good pair. We make an excellent pair, Jenna agreed. Now, are you ready to face our friends and their inevitable interrogation about last night? Because Emma texted me this morning demanding details, and I'd like to tell her that my girlfriend and I are very happy together. Your girlfriend? Casey repeated, still marveling at how natural it sounded. Yes, I think I'm ready for that. But maybe we should practice our story first? Just so we don't accidentally contradict each other when Sophie starts asking about timeline details and whether we've been secretly dating this whole time. Casey, Jenna said with fond exasperation, we're not planning a military operation. We're just telling our friends that we kissed and decided to make it official. It's allowed to be simple and happy instead of complicated and stressful. Right, Casey said, taking a deep breath. Simple and happy. I can do that. Good, Jenna said warmly. Now get dressed, babe. I'm taking my girlfriend out for breakfast, and then we're going to Emma's to collect our $20. $20? The bet money, Jenna explained cheerfully. Emma and Sophie have been betting on when we'd finally get together since literally the second week of our friendship. Emma said it would happen before winter break. Sophie said it would take until next semester. Emma wins. Casey laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. They were betting on us? Everyone was betting on us, babe, Jenna said affectionately. We were not as subtle as we thought we were. The breakfast date had been perfect in the way that first official dates rarely manage to be: comfortable conversation, shared laughter, and the kind of easy intimacy that came from months of friendship evolving into something more intentional and beautiful. Casey had ordered her usual coffee and almost choked on it when Jenna reached across the table to casually intertwine their fingers, the gesture so natural and right that it felt like they'd been doing it for years instead of hours. But it was the walk to Emma's apartment afterward that really tested Casey's newfound confidence in their relationship status. Jenna had slipped her hand into Casey's as they crossed the campus quad, and suddenly Casey was hyper-aware of every person they passed, every potential witness to this public declaration of their changed dynamic. You're tense, Jenna observed, squeezing Casey's hand gently as they approached Emma's building. Still worried about what everyone's going to think. Not worried exactly, Casey said, though that wasn't entirely true. Just adjusting to the idea that this is real now. That we don't have to hide it or pretend it's something else. She paused, looking at their joined hands. I keep expecting someone to point and laugh, or for you to realize this is a mistake and drop my hand. Casey, Jenna stopped walking and turned to face her fully, bringing their joined hands up between them. I'm not going to drop your hand. I'm not going to realize this is a mistake. I'm not going to wake up tomorrow and decide I was temporarily insane when I kissed you last night. She smiled warmly. I'm going to keep holding your hand and calling you babe and probably embarrassing you with public displays of affection until you get so used to it that you forget to panic about it. Before Casey could respond, Emma's voice echoed across the courtyard with the subtlety of a foghorn. Oh my God, finally. Alex, get over here. They're holding hands. I told you it would happen before winter break. Within seconds, they were surrounded by their entire friend group, all talking at once with varying degrees of excitement and self-satisfaction. Sophie was practically bouncing with glee. Alex was shaking her head with fond exasperation, and Emma was already pulling out her phone to take pictures like she was documenting a historical event. Okay, Alex said, raising her hands for quiet. Everyone calm down before you scare them back into denial. Yes, it's obvious they're together now. Yes, Emma wins the bet. Yes, we're all very happy for them. Can we go inside before we attract any more attention? As they climbed the stairs to Emma's apartment, Casey felt Jenna's hand squeeze hers reassuringly. See? Jenna murmured close to her ear. Not so scary. They're excited for us. They're terrifying, Casey whispered back, but she was smiling. Emma's already planning our wedding, isn't she? Probably, Jenna agreed cheerfully. But don't worry, I'll protect you from any overly enthusiastic party planning. That's what girlfriends are for. The word still sent a thrill through Casey every time Jenna said it, like a reminder that this wasn't a dream or a temporary moment of insanity, but an actual relationship with someone who apparently found her disasters charming rather than disqualifying. Once they were settled in Emma's living room with coffee and what appeared to be a celebratory box of donuts, the interrogation began in earnest. So, Sophie said, settling cross-legged on the floor with the intensity of an investigative journalist, how long has this been going on? And don't you dare try to tell us it just happened last night, because we all saw the tension building for months. It really did just happen last night, Casey protested, then caught Jenna's amused expression. I mean, the kissing and the official relationship part. The feelings, well, those have been building for a while. A while. Emma pressed. Define a while. Weeks? Months? Since the beginning of the semester? Since probably our third conversation, Casey admitted, feeling her cheeks warm. But I thought it was completely one-sided until last night. I was convinced Jenna was way out of my league and just being friendly. Casey, Alex said with fond exasperation, Jenna spent an entire study session explaining calculus concepts she already knew just to have an excuse to sit close to you and hold your hand. She brought you coffee every morning for 2 weeks when you mentioned being too rushed to stop at the cafe. She laughed at your terrible literature puns like they were actually funny. My puns are funny, Casey protested weakly. They're objectively terrible, Jenna said affectionately, leaning against Casey's shoulder on the couch. But they're your terrible puns, which makes them endearing. Plus, you get this little proud smile when you deliver them that's absolutely adorable. See? Sophie pointed at them triumphantly. That's not how friends talk about each other's terrible jokes. That's how girlfriends talk about each other's terrible jokes. The casual use of the word girlfriends sent another wave of surreal happiness through Casey. It was starting to feel real, this idea that she got to be Jenna's girlfriend, that all those months of careful friendship and suppressed feelings had led to something official and wonderful. Okay, but what about the babe incident? Emma asked with obvious delight. Please tell me that's what finally broke the dam of mutual obliviousness. The what now? Alex looked confused, which meant she was the only one who hadn't heard about Casey's mortifying slip-up earlier in the week. Oh, this is the best part, Sophie said, settling in to tell the story with obvious relish. Tuesday at lunch, Casey was trying to get the hot sauce and accidentally called Jenna babe in front of all of us. Just completely forgot to filter her thoughts and let her true feelings slip out. And then, Emma continued, Jenna spent the entire week torturing Casey by calling her babe at every opportunity. It was simultaneously the most painful and most obvious flirting I've ever witnessed. It was not obvious, Casey protested. I thought she was just making fun of me for embarrassing myself. Casey, Jenna said gently, I don't tease people I'm not interested in. When I like someone, I find excuses to touch them, to spend time with them, to work their name into conversations. When I really like someone, I absolutely will use their accidental pet names as an excuse to see how they react to hearing it from me. But you could have just told me you were interested, Casey pointed out. It would have saved us both a lot of stress and confusion. Where's the fun in that? Jenna grinned. Besides, you're cute when you're flustered. I liked seeing you blush every time I said it. I liked watching you try to figure out if I was flirting or just being mean. You're terrible, Casey said, but she was smiling as she said it. My girlfriend is terrible, and I'm completely gone on her. Your girlfriend? Emma sighed dramatically. I can't believe you two finally figured it out. I was starting to think I'd have to lock you in a closet together until one of you cracked. That would have been traumatic for everyone involved, Alex observed dryly. Casey would have had a panic attack, and Jenna would have spent the entire time making jokes about the metaphorical implications of being locked in a closet. True, Jenna agreed cheerfully. But it probably would have worked. Casey's very easy to seduce when she can't escape and overthink everything. Casey felt her face flame with embarrassment and something that might have been anticipation. Jenna.
What?
It's true. You think too much, babe. Sometimes you just have to trust that when someone spends months flirting with you, they probably like you back. As their friends continued to tease them about their mutual obliviousness and celebrate the long-awaited development in their relationship, Casey realized that being Jenna's girlfriend publicly was actually easier than she'd expected. The anxiety about judgment and visibility was fading, replaced by a warm sense of rightness about finally being able to claim this connection they'd been building for months. So, Jenna said quietly while their friends debated the timeline of their relationship development, "How are you feeling about all this? The public girlfriend thing, I mean." Good, Casey said, surprised by how true it was. Really good, actually. Better than I thought I would. It feels natural. Right. Good. Jenna smiled, pressing a soft kiss to Casey's cheek that made their friends dissolve into fresh rounds of celebration. Because I plan on being very public about how gone I am on you, babe. 3 weeks into being official girlfriends, Casey and Jenna had settled into a comfortable rhythm of coffee dates, study sessions that involved more kissing than actual studying, and the kind of casual intimacy that made their friends simultaneously happy for them and slightly nauseous from all the sweetness. Casey had almost stopped panicking every time Jenna called her babe in public, though she still blushed whenever Jenna would kiss her cheek unexpectedly or hold her hand during group conversations. It was Tuesday evening, and they were supposed to meet for dinner at their favorite campus cafe, the same place where Casey had first made her mortifying slip-up that had started this whole beautiful disaster. Casey arrived 15 minutes early, as was her habit, and spent the time reviewing her psychology notes while stealing glances at the door every few seconds. But when Jenna finally appeared, 25 minutes late and looking frazzled in a way that was completely unlike her usual composed demeanor, Casey felt her stomach tighten with concern. Sorry, Jenna said breathlessly, sliding into the seat across from Casey with an apologetic smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Professor Williams kept us late discussing the group project, and then I got caught up talking to Madison about. She trailed off, seemingly realizing she was rambling. About what? Casey asked, though something in Jenna's expression made her wish she hadn't. There was a guardedness there that Casey hadn't seen since before they'd started dating, a careful quality that felt like a step backward from the easy openness they'd been building. Just about the project. You know how these things go. Jenna picked up her menu with unnecessary focus, avoiding Casey's eyes in a way that felt deliberate and concerning. Madison had some ideas about the presentation format that might work better than what we discussed earlier. The explanation felt incomplete, loaded with a kind of careful omissions that Casey had learned to recognize during their months of friendship. Jenna was hiding something, and the realization sent anxiety spiraling through Casey's chest like ice water. Madison Chun? Casey asked, trying to keep her voice casual despite the way her pulse had quickened. From your literature class? Madison Chun was everything Casey wasn't, confident without self-doubt, effortlessly sophisticated, the kind of person who could wear expensive clothes and make them look casual rather than trying too hard. She was also, Casey had noticed during the few times they'd interacted, exactly the type of person Jenna usually found interesting, intelligent, well-traveled, from the kind of family that summered in places Casey couldn't afford to visit for a weekend. Yes, Madison Chun, Jenna said, and there was something in her tone that Casey couldn't quite identify, but definitely didn't like. She's my partner for Professor Williams' final project. We're doing a comparative analysis of contemporary feminist poetry, and she has some really insightful perspectives on the intersection between personal identity and political expression. The way Jenna's voice warmed when she talked about Madison's insights made Casey's stomach clench with something ugly and unfamiliar. That sounds really interesting, Casey managed, though what she really wanted to ask was whether Madison's insights were the reason Jenna had been spending increasing amounts of time at the library lately, and whether those study sessions involved the kind of casual touching and intimate conversations that had characterized Casey and Jenna's friendship before it became something more. "It is interesting," Jenna said, finally looking up from her menu to meet Casey's eyes. "Madison's incredibly smart. She lived in Paris for 2 years during high school, so she has this amazing perspective on European feminist movements that adds so much depth to our analysis." Casey felt something cold and sharp settle in her chest as she realized she was jealous, not just of Madison's intelligence or international experience, but of the way Jenna's face lit up when she talked about her, the same way it used to light up when she talked about Casey's literature insights or terrible puns. "How often are you two meeting to work on this project?" Casey asked, trying to sound supportive rather than possessive, though she suspected she was failing based on the way Jenna's expression shifted into something more guarded. "A few times a week. It's a major project, Casey, worth 30% of our final grade. We want to make sure we do it right." Jenna's voice had taken on a defensive quality that made Casey realize she was handling this conversation badly, letting her insecurity turn what should have been normal relationship communication into something that felt like an interrogation. "I'm not questioning your academic priorities," Casey said carefully. I feel like I've barely seen you lately. Between the project meetings and your other commitments, it seems like we only have time for quick coffee dates between classes." "That's not true," Jenna protested, but even as she said it, Casey could see her mentally reviewing their recent interactions and realizing that Casey had a point. "We had dinner Sunday night, and we studied together yesterday. We studied together for 45 minutes before you got a text from Madison asking for help with research sources, and then you left to meet her at the library," Casey pointed out, feeling petty and clingy, but unable to stop herself. "And Sunday dinner was interrupted by 3 phone calls about project logistics." Jenna was quiet for a long moment, studying Casey's face with an expression that was becoming increasingly distant. "Casey, are you jealous of Madison?" "I don't know," Casey admitted, surprised by her own honesty. "Maybe. I know it's stupid and possessive, but I feel like I'm competing for your attention with someone who's objectively more interesting and sophisticated than I am." "That's ridiculous," Jenna said, but her tone lacked the warmth and reassurance Casey had been hoping for. "Madison is my project partner, Casey. We're working together because we have to, not because I'm looking to replace you with someone more interesting." The phrase "replace you" hit Casey like a physical blow because it articulated exactly what she'd been afraid of without realizing it. "I'm not saying you're trying to replace me," Casey said quietly. "I'm saying that I'm scared you're realizing there are people out there who are better matches for you than your disaster girlfriend who panics about pet names and walks into lampposts while reading your texts." "Casey," Jenna's voice was soft but tired, lacking the patient affection that usually characterized her responses to Casey's anxiety spirals. "You can't keep doing this. You can't keep assuming that every person I interact with is a threat to our relationship, or that every moment I spend away from you means I'm losing interest." "I'm not assuming that about every person," Casey protested. "I'm worried about this specific person who you clearly find fascinating and who probably doesn't have emotional breakdowns about being called pet names in public." "You're right," Jenna said suddenly, her voice sharp with something that might have been frustration or disappointment. "Madison doesn't have emotional breakdowns about being called pet names. She also doesn't make terrible literature puns, or get excited about perfectly organized study notes, or blush when I tell her she's beautiful." Jenna leaned back in her chair, studying Casey with an expression that was becoming increasingly unreadable. "But you know what else she doesn't do? She doesn't question my loyalty every time I mention working with someone else. She doesn't make me feel like I have to justify my academic commitments or apologize for finding other people interesting." The words hit Casey like a series of small explosions, each one more devastating than the last. Jenna, I'm not trying to make you justify anything. I'm just trying to understand why it feels like our relationship has become less of a priority for you lately. Less of a priority. Jenna's voice rose slightly, drawing glances from nearby tables. Casey, I rearranged my entire schedule to accommodate our coffee dates. I turned down a study abroad opportunity because I didn't want to be away from you for a semester. I've been patient with your anxiety and supportive of your academic goals and understanding when you need space to process things. She paused, her dark eyes flashing with something Casey had never seen before. But apparently none of that matters because I'm working on a class project with someone you've decided is a threat to our relationship. Casey felt tears prick her eyes as she realized how badly she'd mishandled this conversation, how her insecurity had turned a simple discussion about feeling neglected into something that felt like relationship-ending territory. I didn't know about the study abroad opportunity, she said quietly. Why didn't you tell me you turned something down for us? Because I didn't want you to feel guilty about it, Jenna said, her voice softer now but still carrying an edge of frustration. Because I made that choice freely. Because being with you is more important to me than spending a semester in London. But Casey, if you're going to question my commitment every time I have academic obligations that don't center around our relationship, then maybe I made the wrong choice. The implication that Jenna might regret choosing Casey over London, that she might be reconsidering their entire relationship because of Casey's jealousy and insecurity, was more than Casey could process sitting in a crowded cafe. I think I need some space, Casey said suddenly, standing up and gathering her things with hands that shook slightly. I need to think about what you just said, and I can't do that here. Casey, wait. Jenna called after her, but Casey was already walking away, her vision blurred with tears and her chest tight with the realization that she might have just ruined the best thing that had ever happened to her because she couldn't trust that someone like Jenna would choose someone like her when better options were available. The silence between Casey and Jenna stretched for 3 agonizing days, during which Casey alternated between composing heartfelt apology texts that she deleted before sending and convincing herself that Jenna was probably relieved to be free of her clingy, insecure girlfriend. Emma and Sophie had tried to intervene with varying degrees of subtlety, but Casey had deflected their attempts at mediation with the same stubborn pride that had gotten her into this mess in the first place. It was Thursday evening when Casey finally swallowed her pride and walked to Jenna's dorm room, her heart pounding with the kind of terror usually reserved for final exams and dentist appointments. She stood outside Jenna's door for a full 5 minutes, rehearsing apologies and trying to work up the courage to knock, when the door opened to reveal Jenna looking surprised and tired and absolutely beautiful in an oversized sweater that Casey recognized as one of her favorites. Casey, Jenna said softly, her voice carrying none of the anger or frustration that had characterized their last conversation. I was just about to text you. Were you? Casey asked, surprised by how much hope she could pack into 2 small words. I was coming to apologize. For Tuesday, for being jealous and possessive and making you feel like you had to justify working with Madison. Jenna stepped aside to let Casey into her room, closing the door behind them with careful quiet. I was going to apologize too, she admitted, settling cross-legged on her bed while Casey remained standing near the door, uncertain about whether she was welcome to come closer. For what I said about making the wrong choice. That was cruel and unfair, and I didn't mean it. The relief that flooded through Casey was so intense it was almost dizzying. You didn't mean it? Of course I didn't mean it, Jenna said, her voice warm with the kind of affection Casey had been missing desperately for 3 days. Casey, choosing you over London was the easiest decision I've ever made. Choosing you over anything would be the easiest decision I could make. Casey felt tears prick her eyes as she finally moved closer, sitting on the edge of Jenna's bed with careful distance between them. I'm sorry I made you feel like you had to choose between me and your academic commitments. I know how important school is to you, and I never want to be the reason you feel like you can't pursue opportunities or work with people who challenge you intellectually. And I'm sorry I didn't communicate better about feeling overwhelmed with project deadlines and social obligations, Jenna replied. You were right that we haven't had much quality time lately, and instead of acknowledging that and working with you to find solutions, I got defensive and made you feel like your concerns weren't valid." They sat in silence for a moment, processing the relief of mutual apologies and the gradual return of the easy intimacy that had made their relationship feel so natural and right. "For what it's worth," Jenna said finally, "Madison asked me yesterday if you and I were having problems because apparently I've been talking about you constantly during our project meetings. She said listening to me worry about whether you were okay was making it difficult to focus on feminist poetry analysis." Casey looked up sharply. She did. She also said that anyone who could inspire the kind of loyalty and affection I clearly feel for you must be pretty extraordinary, and that she hoped we work things out because she's never seen me this happy in a relationship. Jenna reached across the space between them to take Casey's hand, the contact sending warmth up Casey's arm like electricity. "Casey, I don't want anyone else. I don't want someone more sophisticated or well-traveled or academically accomplished. I want you, with your terrible puns and your anxiety spirals and your tendency to walk into furniture when you're distracted by my texts." "My puns aren't terrible," Casey protested weakly, though she was smiling now, the familiar comfort of their banter making everything feel possible again. "They're strategically nerdy. They're objectively terrible," Jenna said affectionately, moving closer until she could cup Casey's face in her free hand. "And I love them. I love everything about you, including the parts that drive me crazy sometimes, including your jealousy, even though we need to work on healthier ways to communicate about it." "I love you too," Casey said, the words spilling out before she could lose her nerve. "I love you, and I'm sorry I almost ruined everything because I couldn't believe that someone like you would choose someone like me." "Someone like me always chooses someone like you," Jenna said softly, leaning forward to press their foreheads together. "Someone like me falls head over heels for someone like you and then spends weeks torturing you with pet names because she doesn't know how else to show her feelings." "Someone like me falls for it completely," Casey whispered, closing the distance between them to kiss Jenna soft and sweet and perfect. "Someone like me calls you babe in front of everyone because she forgets to filter her thoughts when she's looking at you." When they broke apart, Jenna was smiling with the radiant warmth that had been making Casey's heart race since their first conversation months ago. "So," she said, settling back against her pillows and pulling Casey down beside her, "are we okay? Really okay? Not just temporarily resolved but still worried okay?" "We're really okay," Casey said, curling into Jenna's side with a kind of contentment that came from fighting and making up and realizing your relationship was strong enough to survive both. "We're better than okay. We're babe calling, terrible pun making, occasionally jealous but working on it okay." "Perfect," Jenna said, pressing a kiss to the top of Casey's head. "Because I have a confession to make." "What kind of confession?" Casey asked, though she was no longer worried about the answer. Whatever Jenna had to tell her, they could handle it together. "Madison asked if I wanted to set up a double date with her and her girlfriend next weekend," Jenna said, her voice carrying barely suppressed laughter. "Apparently she thinks we're cute together and wants to get to know the person who's been making me smile during project meetings." Casey groaned and buried her face in Jenna's shoulder. "She has a girlfriend? The entire time I was jealous of her. She has a girlfriend." "She has a girlfriend," Jenna confirmed cheerfully. "A very serious girlfriend who she's been with for 2 years and talks about constantly. I probably should have mentioned that on Tuesday, but I was too frustrated to think clearly." "You're never going to let me live this down, are you?" Casey mumbled against Jenna's sweater. "Probably not," Jenna agreed, running her fingers through Casey's hair with gentle affection. "But don't worry, babe. I'll only bring it up when you need reminding that I chose you. I keep choosing you, and I'm going to keep choosing you even when you're being ridiculous about imaginary threats to our relationship." Casey lifted her head to look at Jenna, taking in the warmth in her dark eyes and the soft smile that was reserved specifically for moments like this. "I love you," she said again, because it felt important to say it as many times as possible now that she was allowed to. "I love you too," Jenna replied, pulling Casey closer until they were tangled together on her narrow dorm bed like they had all the time in the world. "Now and always, my beautifully ridiculous babe." If you enjoyed this content and want to support the channel in a special way, try clicking the thanks button below. It's the one with the heart and $sign icon. With super thanks, you can make a direct contribution to the channel, which helps me keep creating awesome videos for you.